everybody. Hi. I am Morgan Stafford. I am in the leadership of the UNCA Psychology Club. Our student organization, along with the UNCA Center for Diversity and Education, are your hosts for the evening, and we welcome you. Thank you for being here. Tonight's event and the two-day visit of Chief Burbank to Asheville are happening with the support and involvement of numerous UNCA administrators and faculty. For example, we thank Dean Kahns for his support of Chief Burbank's visit and the UNCA Police Chief Eric Boyce for his leadership in planning Chief Burbank's visit to our campus. Our Chancellor, Dr. Joseph Urgo, is here tonight, and I would like to invite him to say a few words as we get started. And after Dr. Urgo speaks, I will invite Chief Burbank. Thank you.
Thank you, and I want to thank the Psychology Department and Professor Keith Cox for taking the lead on organizing this evening. Every morning I walk my little Jack Russell dog on the streets of Asheville, and I cross Merriman Avenue every morning, and there's a crosswalk there that doesn't always work. And so 5 days out of 7, I jaywalk. And I've been thinking a lot about jaywalking. I think we all have been thinking about that. And the fact that as a white male, I never felt that I was putting myself in danger on Merriman all the time, but I never felt I was putting myself in danger by jaywalking, and might even do that in front of a policeman if I felt it wasn't working. So I thought a lot about that lately, and a lot of what that means, and what that means to the life that I've lived, and the life that others have lived who don't look like me, and the relationship between those things, and how much we understand about these matters. One of the most important civic relationships in a democracy is between the people and the police. And when that breaks down, the democracy is in trouble. And we've seen that break down over American history at key moments in our history, when the idea of police mistreating citizens strikes home, and usually is the cause for progressive change as a result. I think we're in one of those periods where we're re-examining our practices. Second thing I want to point out is that universities are places for progressive dialogue. Difficult conversations, public discussion about race and police practices are always challenging. That's why I'm particularly thankful to our own Police Chief Boyce for helping organize tonight and bringing these issues to the fore. As Americans, our history is fraught with conflict between police and citizens in areas of race and class. We've seen it in the labor movement, we've seen it in the civil rights movement, we've seen it too often. So when we think about race and we think about police, there's a long history which makes these conversations often very difficult and often very complicated. But to get past that, we need safe spaces to have those conversations, where we can voice our opinions and voice our concerns and work toward change. UNC Asheville has played its role in these conversations. I'm thinking of Professor Dwight Mullen and his State of Black Asheville project, which has been documenting racial disparities in this city for a long time, for years. These disparities include criminal justice and police practices. And like many cities across the U.S., Asheville is currently struggling with these controversies and these conversations. In response to the Rush video, a number of policy changes have been offered at the county and city level. Debate about these proposals is ongoing, and I'm pleased to see Mayor Esther Manheimer tonight here in this audience, and the police chief is also here, I believe. This is a good sign for this city. If the city has these conversations, it will be a healthier city. Tonight's speaker comes to us from the Center for Police Equity. The center works with police agencies across the country to promote racially fair practices in law enforcement and criminal justice. The center has a national profile for providing practices to identify and address racial inequities in policing. Their approach is rooted in sophisticated data analysis and policy expertise, and those are fancy words for saying we have new ways of understanding our problems, and we have new ways to finding solutions to those problems, and we want to put those methods to use. So now I'd like to invite back to the podium, Morgan Stafford to introduce our speaker.
Thank you for your reflections, Dr. Urgo. We are glad to have you here tonight. The seed for tonight was planted over 2 years ago when Brianna Joseph, a psychology major, started asking questions about how personality science could inform issues of race and policing practices. She watched the videos from across the United States of police officers shooting or choking African American men, and she felt called to action. She turned to her major, the discipline of psychology, to help her to understand these shocking events. Other students and faculty members joined her, and they started to ask what kind of answers psychological science could have to offer to help address the inordinate impact that race has on policing here in America and in our city of Asheville. The groups quickly learned that the Center for Policing Equity, or CPE, where Chief Burbank is the Director of Law Enforcement Engagement. CPE has been at the vanguard of a revolution in how policymakers, government officials, and local communities across the United States evaluate and understand the impact of race on policing practices. The CPE uses state-of-the-science, data-driven methods to help police agencies across the country evaluate when, how, and to what extent race alters police altercation and action. Based on their track record of innovation, the CPE was invited to work with the Obama White House and Justice Department as the federal government sought to provide national-level response to questions of race and policing. Today, the CPE maintains working relations with over 240 policing agencies across the country. Chief Burbank joined the Center for Policing Equity in 2015 and has played a central role in the organization's outreach to police agencies across the country. Maintaining CPE's national profile, Chief Burbank has testified before Congress, and he also directs law enforcement agency engagements with the Center's National Justice Database, the nation's first database tracking national statistics on police behavior. From 2006 to 2015, Chief Burbank was the Chief of Police for Salt Lake City, Utah, and he earned many designations and awards during his tenure as police chief. In 2011, he was chosen by the Salt Lake Tribune as Utahn of the Year. And in 2013, he was selected as one of 6 police chiefs in the nation to meet with the President Barack Obama to discuss gun violence in America. In 2014, he was selected as member of the Enlightened 50 Most Influential Leaders in the state of Utah. And in addition, he was the first vice president of the Major Cities Chief Association, an assembly of the 75 largest policing agencies in the United States and in Canada. We have been planning Chief Burbank's visit for some time, but the recent release of the video of Johnny Rush being beaten by an Asheville City police officer demonstrates with appalling clarity the need for the discussion we hope to have tonight. Asheville prides itself as a progressive city. So the beating of Johnny Rush, along with other credible reports of racial inequalities and inequities in our city's policing, should be deeply unsettling to us. We hope Chief Burbank can offer us concrete direction on how to live up to our values. There will be a question and answer time after Chief Burbank's talk, and if you are a student who is interested and to hear more about these kind of topics in our community, please see me afterwards to sign up for a list. I'd be happy to talk with you. Thank you. Chief Burbank. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. That's some high expectation. One of the things that I think is very important to start with is the fact that no matter what CPE publishes, no matter what I speak about today, and no matter what ultimate look comes for policing in the area or across the nation, it is not about that small slice that we're looking at and putting forward now that is going to change attitude, behavior, and the problems that we face. It is only the beginning of the discussion that needs to take place, and it is in fact the discussion that will change the outcome of policing. One of the things that I like to start with, and boy, it's a great room, thank you all for coming. Who believes that policing in America today is legitimate? We've got a show of hands on this, and yes, this is a class of participation. So, not surprising, we've got some people in the room that absolutely, yes, there's some legitimacy. What we are suffering from, we as my former profession, and one that I'm still involved in, the reason that I'm with the center is because I decided I could not have the influence that I wanted being a police chief, but I still wanted to be in policing. I didn't want to have to deal with budgets, and those of you in law enforcement, I know we've got a couple of chiefs in the room, understand what budgets and everything that goes into that. But strangely enough, I enjoyed the crisis. I enjoyed dealing with the public and trying to solve the problem. And in fact, I think that's where I was best. and some of the recognitions that I received were cited because I took my issue and problem to the public to solve and participated with them. Because this crisis of legitimacy that we are suffering comes from the fact that participation in society today in the United States is not best when participation is done because of the negative consequence or penalty that might be associated with not participating or participating too vigorously, we'll say. Good research has shown that participation, legitimacy, trust, and confidence in the government, in the police, best comes when people trust, when people believe that they are included in the decision-making process. Now, I'm willing to bet, and we won't try this experiment, but it would be fun, right? If we said we're not leaving this room till we get everybody to agree on whatever issue it is facing Asheville right now, not going to come close. Because unfortunately, what we find is we are far too polarized. Right? You have absolutely people on this side that for whatever reason, and if you are or your family members have been the victim of a police officer involved shooting, if you have been the victim of a circumstance where a police officer behaved inappropriately, sometimes it doesn't matter that that officer lost his job. You should be outraged. These are the individuals that we put forth as leaders willing to sacrifice some of our very civil rights in order to participate with them. And when that system fails us, boy, we are upset, and we should be. But the challenge that we find is we need to move beyond upset. Because upset in this modern day and age, and again, referring to some of the recognition that I received, was because of the modern media, and it is playing every minute of the day. But that is not always legitimate communication. Anger gets you there, but it doesn't create the solve. And we should never be satisfied as to which side of an issue gets more TV time. I'm effective because I went on whatever show and said I was outraged. We're selling ourselves short. And what we want to accomplish is a change, a reform in the system. Because what we have in place for policing in America for the last 250 years functions exactly like we intended. We send police officers out in this nation every single day, and there's nobody in this room who, if they were in charge of police officers, do I think would send them out and say, I want you to go out and violate people's rights. I want you to be racist, right? I want you to use force and heavy-handedness. I've been very fortunate to travel the world and, quite frankly, throughout the country and witness firsthand, nobody intends to send their people out like this. Nor do I think that happens here. But what we have is we deal with people. And we deal with people that come across the board with preconceived notions, with ideas, with bigotry, with hatred, with love and compassion. And what we have to find is in that moment of crisis, that very love and compassion. But we've had a challenge. When I began my career, almost 30 years ago, Rodney King occurred in Los Angeles. And we were outraged, as we should be. Have we changed? Have we changed the outcome? As a police officer at the time, I received a great deal of training, and it's taken all kinds of different forms. Did it help me? Absolutely. Did it change the outcome? No. And that's the frustration, because we have not changed the outcome. And what that outcome is, and this is what is difficult to put our fingers on as to what is the depth of that outcome, but what we know is the end product of policing in America. There is disparity in who is held accountable for actions or who might be arrested, incarcerated. And what we at the Center for Policing Equity try and accomplish, because this is a huge problem, and if you are looking strictly at policing, well, then we're making a mistake. Because the question of the day is, right, is somebody encountering the police, incarcerated, committing crime because of the circumstances of health care, unemployment, mental health issues, drug and alcohol, or are they in that situation of drug and alcohol dependency because of their upfront participation in the law enforcement system, in the criminal justice system? And those people who are in here studying, looking for a research project, give me the answer to that one, and you can be up here talking. Because we don't know that for sure. And I don't know that we have an absolute study that shows that, because we have been so siloed in our approach. Well, unfortunately, because the problem is so large, the Center for Policing Equity can't absolutely tackle all this. So what we've tried to accomplish is to say, we are going to look at that front end of the system, because we know that the outcome is disparate. We know that the outcome is bias. What is then the contribution of the front door of this system and who we bring in? Because one of the things that you look at, and having sat down with police chiefs across the country, nobody is intentionally, right? Even if you think about this, even if they're inclined to believe this, do not want to fall to the scrutiny that will come from this type of behavior. Now, having said that, one of the things that I like to make sure everyone knows up front, nothing I say excuses criminal misconduct by police officers and inappropriate use of force. Right? What we try and do is explain why that happened and hopefully prevent that from occurring. But that is never an excuse for that. And you have a situation that I'm sure has a lot to do with the number of people who came to hear me speak today. And you can look at that moment in time and say, absolutely, I disagree with that. That should not have happened. But it's very difficult when we start looking at all that goes into the makeup of 2 human beings, 3 human beings at that moment in time, when emotion is driving our decision-making process. And in fact, yes, there's de-escalation training. There's many, many things that are valuable. I'm not minimizing any of the impact of that. But that has taken place. Historically, that has taken place. Those types of things have taken, and we still haven't changed the outcome. So the argument that I have, the argument that the Center for Policing Equity has, is let's change why we get involved in the situation in the first place. Now, one of the things that we do when we go into a police agency, and I think this is important to know, because I know there will be questions on this, and I know some of you are here to hear what we can do, what we can't do. We take no money for the work that we do, right? All our funding is through independent private grants and donations that we receive. And absolutely, if you look, we play very liberal, right? In fact, I have been accused by some of my colleagues as being one of the most liberal police chiefs in the country. But then we are playing politics, right? Identity politics, which is even worse. So what we try and do is eliminate that. Yes, there are people who are funding police reform are absolutely interested in an outcome of reform. But what we are more interested in is giving back to police agencies and the communities they serve an unbiased, third-party look at the data and the statistics that are taking place. And then with a few suggestions, saying here's how you can potentially change or reduce the negative outcome that's being perceived. So a little example, and one of the things that we do not, right? We sign agreements with police agencies to protect their data. So we don't give out the data unless the police agency says. We don't even tell anyone that they're participating. Now, we encourage police agencies, because I see the tremendous value in it and have personally, to be open with the public and to participate with the public. But in Las Vegas, the Las Vegas Metro PD was on the verge of going under consent decree a number of years ago. Right? The federal government had come in and they looked at it, there was lawsuits filed, and not surprisingly, they didn't feel that was the best. And so they started to look and see, and they consulted with the COPS office, how can we change this outlook? And this is an oversimplified thing, and I know absolutely I should be held accountable for trying to oversimplify the problem in America today. But these are just one example. So when we looked at the data there, what we noticed was that there was a tremendous use of force that followed a vehicle pursuit. Well, when you look at a vehicle pursuit, what does that involve? Some of the highest adrenaline, and there are a few people in the room who have probably been involved in a vehicle chase before. And by the time that chase is over, and it turns then into a foot pursuit, or trying to handcuff or contain the person that you have now chased with your adrenaline sky high through the city, their emotion is high, they are in fear for their lives. Boy, it's hard to say we're going to de-escalate and prevent this from happening. And so the recommendation was, if you are the involved officer in the pursuit, you will not, if practical, be the individual to arrest, to go hands-on and actually physically arrest the individual. That dramatically reduced force in Las Vegas. And interestingly enough, dramatically reduced some of what we saw as the outcome and the bias in the outcome, right? And the negative use of force associated with it. Very simple. Now, solutions are not always that simple. I wish they were, because we would be famous, being able to solve all the world's problems. But what we have is we have in society what is referred to, and this is where I always have to lead with a caveat, and some of you heard me speak earlier, some of the students in the room. The founder of our organization, Dr. Philip Atiba Goff, did his graduate work on race and systems and implicit bias and identity traps specifically. So those circumstances that allow preconceived ideas or notions about a group of people to enter in to the interaction before us. Now that's much oversimplified, and Phil, if you're listening to this or will be, I apologize right up front. But this idea, and we actually played this game in class earlier. I could go around the room and pick out certain people and have you stand up in front, and I ask the group, and it makes everybody really uncomfortable when you ask this. Who in this group is a drug dealer? And you can get very specific and say, who is the cocaine dealer? Well, we've all watched TV, we've seen the news, we know who's bringing cocaine into the country. Well, change that to who was the crack dealer a few years ago? Who is more likely to be involved in criminal behavior? Now, people in this room are shocked. Right? How dare you talk about these racial... This is the issue before us today, and if we are afraid to confront this in an environment where we are all safe and actually honest with one another, how are you ever going to expect a police officer to conduct the same business in the middle of a crisis in the street? We need to start having the frank discussion because that plays directly into policing. In fact, in our research, we have found that one of the most detrimental predictors of policing bias in individuals is the fear that the officer will be perceived as a racist. Because part of what we do is actually give a behavioral science study to the officers that we're involved with. The idea being that we can look and we can say, all right, people are people, and we all have attitudes. Here's what we would predict the outcome to be if it were simply the racism of the police agency or the department or the officers themselves. What is best news about that, and it's also very depressing news, is the bias, the disparity interjected into the system is always much greater than what you would anticipate by the individuals. One, again, incredibly depressing that that's the situation that we find ourselves in, but also very encouraging that we can, right, change that outcome with policy, with practice, with deployment measures, as opposed to the very hard of changing hearts and minds of people. We have that within ourselves, that if we can look and identify where that is taking place, we can change the outcome. Now, this is where it is very difficult for those in policing, but it's a conversation that needs to take place. If I were to tell you that in cities that we've studied, and I think it's very important that you don't try and take this information and apply it to the local jurisdiction that you live in or looking at or whatever the circumstances may be, because it can be different, right? And this is very specialized and localized, but we certainly try and draw conclusion as to what's going on in policing. But things like warrantless searches, consent searches, right? There's tremendous disparity in consent searches in agencies that we've looked at. Now, that doesn't mean that it exists in every single agency. But you are, on average, in places that we've studied, 8 times more likely to be stopped by the police if you are a black man as opposed to a white male. You are nearly, in some cities, not across the board, 23 times more likely to be searched. But yet the efficacy of that effort is very low. And in fact, in some cities we've studied, and again, it's very important, I need to emphasize, right? These are specific to cities, and I'm not here to condemn any one city or another, and that's why I'm not giving you the names of these locations. But in some cities, in fact, in looking at this, right, the efficacy, the effort that went into asking white males for consent to search was more productive. This is no different than the dilemma that we face in the world as terrorism. If I were to ask you, and again, nobody wants to stand up and say this in public, what does a terrorist look like? The unfortunate circumstance is we all believe and think, including many, many leaders in our country, this is a Muslim, male.
No, it's Donald Trump.
I can't see a thing, so I can't point you out to anybody. I just hear voices in the crowd behind the light. Now, if you think about the effort to prevent terrorism from occurring in this country, there is a tremendous amount of racial profiling that goes into that business. I don't know that that's right. Is the reason we have not had another terrorist event like 9/11 in America because of our effort? Because of this profiling that takes place? Because of the potential condemnation of a segment of society? These are the types of things that we need to have hard, frank discussions on in order to change what the outcome is. It's the theory, right? If I have a big dog in my front yard and I never get burglarized, is it because of Fido? Don't know for sure. Right? Is the number of police officers, does it correlate to lower crime rate? Oftentimes it correlates to more arrests, but is that in turn lowering the crime rate? So these are the types of things that the Center for Policing Equity tries to look at and get answers to. Now, the nice thing is, again, we do not charge money to those people that we participate with. I cannot say that enough, because the accusation is always. Now, having said that, the reason that we do this is because our intent is to be a third party, uninvolved third party. Now, Chris Burbank certainly has his opinions, Phil Goff has his opinions, and you can decide for yourself on that. But the science that we produce is independent of influence from the police agency, from advocacy groups, from politicians that are involved. And why that makes us easier to swallow, I won't say better, easier to swallow, is because we are not playing to an agenda. And you can argue, right? Again, I don't have any desire to debate that with you. You can certainly say, yep, you're a liberal organization and this is what you do. But when it comes right down to it, I'm pretty confident in the science that we produce, that it takes out the politics. And we can back that up with where we're at. And so you get a report that says this is what's taking place, that hopefully all involved parties. Now, when I go meet and mediate in communities, I don't want the police producing the data. Now, they own the data, right? The data resides in the police department, and that's why we partner with police agencies to get access to the data. I don't want the local advocacy group to be analyzing the data. And not that I don't trust them, not that they are incapable of it, there's some great smart people out there who could probably do a wonderful job. But again, they have an idea of what they want out of the data. And it's not a bad idea, right? I'm not condemning the notion that we want to change police behavior, but what we need is independent data. It's not influenced by the politics of who might be hiring us as far as a mayor, a city council, or anyone else. Here's the independent report, and then take that and generate the discussion within your community of how you are potentially going to change the outcome of policing in America. I got into policing on a whim. I had no desire growing up to be a police officer, let alone a police chief. It turned out to be a profession, and the reason that I'm still there is because I am proud of what has taken place and the improvements and the individuals that exist. Now, are there problems? Absolutely. Are there professors in this university that you don't want to take class from because you feel they're unfair? Are there doctors that you go to? I can pick on all professions. We go around the room, we get everybody. But the difference is, and the challenge that we face as a community, if you go to the doctor tomorrow and the doctor says you have a hangnail, I'm going to amputate your right hand in order to solve this problem. You say, hey, wait a minute, doc. I want a second opinion. See you later. When the police officer turns on the red and blue lights and pulls you over, do you have the opportunity to say, hey, officer, can I get a second opinion on this? When you dial 911, hey, will you send that nice, friendly, empathetic officer, and oh, by the way, I want him to look like I do, and I want him to empathize and have walked in my shoes. I'd love to be able to send that person out to everybody who is in need. But unfortunately, it doesn't happen that way. So we have a combination, we have an expectation, and we should hold our police officers, right, to the very highest standard. Without question, right? They are the people, and some of the very few people, that I would entrust the well-being of my family to, because of the nature in which we live. But in doing so, I need to know, I need to have confidence, right, that they have the best interest. And so when we look at situations, that moment in time, right, is the challenge that we all face, and we want to be outraged, and we should. And we want to change that moment in time, and we should. We want to condemn that moment in time, and absolutely we should. But that is not always a condemnation of the entire system that exists. What led to that, and can we change that? If I were to tell you, and I won't point him out in this room, but I was telling a professor this earlier. If I were to tell you that I think the #1 cause of racial disparity, outcry, and problems in America today is the issuance of traffic tickets, you'd be all over the map on how you respond to this one. If you're like my wife, she'd cheer and say, yes, no more speeding tickets. But if that is truly where we come to, then the discussion needs to be had. Is it a revenue issue? Without question, it's a revenue issue. Is it a safety issue? Well, the correlation between the act of the ticket and safety is very narrow. The stop, the speed board, everything else. But I'm talking about the act of penalizing somebody, and you can argue, well, I won't obey the law unless it's a big penalty. I mean, the reason I obey the law is because traffic tickets are $150. Or do you obey the law because you think you're being treated fairly and it's part of your participation in society? And if that's what this experiment, oops, I apologize, I talk with my hands way too much. If that's what the experiment and the data-driven science says that we should do, are we prepared to take that step? What are the consequences of that? We can never come to the consequence in that if we are always one side of the issue or the other. Right? If we can meet in the middle, and again, I am convinced that good, independent assessment of what's going on is the avenue to find middle ground to make change. And I think we have that within our grasp. And the other nice thing about not having to make any money when I come out and talk to all of you, don't go with CPE if you don't want. Find somebody else to do it. But find somebody to do it. I talked to students today, and I always like to end, and I think I'm to the point where we'll take some questions. I always like to end with, well, what is that action point? Because he admonished us, you can't just be angry, you got to come with something else. Collect data on all police interactions, especially those that involve the constitutional rights of the citizens that we're interacting with. Traffic stops, pedestrian stops, searches, seizures, results, arrests. I mean, you can just go down the list. And then the challenge before you all is you look for somebody to analyze this data, to evaluate whether or not this is right or wrong, because simply benchmarking against the population that exists does not tell the whole story. Does not tell the whole story. You need to look at what is the crime that's occurring. What is the response? Is it hours of the day? Is it night? Who's responding? What is the race and issues of the officers? I mean, there's so much that goes into deciding whether or not that conduct is being influenced by personal bias, being influenced by a system that takes place. There's not a police chief or participant in this room. If I were to tell my officers tomorrow, I can't do that anymore, I'm not, but if I had, and said tomorrow, I want you to go out and enforce license plate violations, because that's a serious crime, and we need to solve it. And I know that sounds a little facetious, but this takes place. I need you to write more tickets because we need more revenue. Officers, go out and do this. And we start writing tickets. Who are those tickets issued to? In Salt Lake City, that would not be the East Bench of Salt Lake City, that one has the means and two speaks English as a first language and understands the rules and regulations and is able to and capable of licensing their vehicles and participating. It would be the west side of town. It would be predominantly our Latino community because the state of Utah refuses to publish driver's license information and handbooks and anything other than English. It would be people who don't understand what the law is when they go get their car from somebody and they purchase a car that they pay good money for and get told, for $100 you can have this plate. Oh, trust me, that's good. And because they have no one to turn to that necessarily is going to give them good information, when the police officer turns the lights and sirens on, points guns at them and says, get down and lay down on the ground because it's a stolen license plate, how do we walk back that interaction? And these are the types of things that I think we can change. I wholeheartedly believe we can change. But responsibility needs to come from both sides. With that, I am happy to answer some questions that you have. And so you know, I got no bounds on this. I'll answer any questions that you have, and I welcome disagreement. There's a microphone here. If you would please get up to the microphone, because I know they're recording this. And that's also, you should know, if you're asking questions, you're going to be, I think it's YouTube, but you're going to be recorded. So make sure you're comfortable with that, and I welcome. Please.
Thank you so much for presenting possibility for community. And my question to you is, when a police community engages your services, how long is that for? And how long does it take you to gather the data and the recommendations that you come up with? Is it a program specifically? Is it several programs? Is it grant funded? How is it that people can actually utilize the data that you're putting together?
Great questions. Thank you very much. So, the one is, I don't have a great answer for you. I wish I did, but it is the shortcoming of the environment in which we live. So when we sign somebody up, there's a process by which we have to come to a memorandum of understanding between the institution that we work with, the university, and the police agency or the city. Those are attorneys going back and forth. Sometimes that takes 2 days, sometimes that takes months and months and months. So that is our first hurdle that we are really working to simplify, because when it comes right down to it, all we care about is we're going to protect your data. Our scientists are certified, they're validated the exact same way that any of your police personnel would be to handle sensitive data and criminal information at a federal level or a state or local level. So we make our researchers have that same level of expertise and experience and training so that we can validate that. Then you have the issue of gathering the data. And the end product is as good as the data that we have going in, as with any research. Some police agencies, and again, I'm not intimate enough with your local area about what the police agencies look like. We have gone to police agencies and said, all right, show us your use of force. They open a drawer and there's a whole stack of papers. There's our use of force for the last 5 years. That's very time consuming to have a researcher go through and sort. Other agencies have everything computerized, it's coordinated with the CAD data, so you have a very seamless interaction that takes place, because what we like to do is all the stops, everything that takes place, if you have, we're getting a little technical as far as a computer-aided dispatch is CAD. Right? So anytime someone calls in for police service, a police officer calls out on the radio, it marks that in the computer as to where that location is. And then you can take that and you can start to extrapolate. What is the crime occurring in the neighborhood? Police, I mean, everything that goes into that. And so if you have that, then the research, again, becomes a little more in-depth and a little more sophisticated. So it kind of depends. The nice thing is we have recently, we received some funding from Google, and part of what they donated to us was 11 of their researchers to design our analytics and to withdraw the information from the from police police systems that are, you know, there's, I don't know how many different computer systems exist, that normalizes the data so that we can conduct this very fast. So we're hopeful that what used to be, in some cases, 6 months of gathering, analyzing, and putting together a report will be done in hours. Now, we're pretty close to this. Right? No guarantees tomorrow that if you give me data from whatever police agency that it'll be turned around in hours. But we're pretty close to this taking place. And so you understand when I talk about normalizing data, because everyone gets a little nervous. So some police agencies, right, if I put my hand on my gun, is that a use of force that gets documented? If I now draw my pistol but point it at the ground, is that a use of force that gets documented? When I raise it and point it at somebody, is that a use of force? Is that a use of deadly force, or is that just a use of force? If I pull the trigger and miss, Is that deadly force when no one got hit? Now, these seem very simple, but they are very complicated, and they are different every part of the country, every state, every city, how they look, how they evaluate, and how they classify all these types of things. So that's a little bit of the challenge that we have trying to normalize data so that we are not unfairly saying, well, police agency X is doing this and this other police agency is not. And so we try and come to that. So having said that, that's a little bit of the challenge that we have and we face. So it just depends how fast we can get the information and the data. We don't go away. So our goal is to provide recommendations or show documentation. Now, I'm not in the business of selling you training, right? I'm really not. And nor is the Center for Policing Equity. There's lots of different training out there, and I think you look appropriately. We've done some training, in fact, for the Department of Justice, but not looking, right? So there is nothing for you to buy after the fact. There is recommendations and a look at your data, an insight into what's going on with how can you change. And again, Las Vegas, not only did they do that change, but they did other changes. So you would implement these change, and then next time we come around in a year, you would have a look to see, is there success? Because one of the failings of policing across the country, right, throughout history, we give officers tons and tons of training. Do we evaluate if it actually produced the outcome that we want? I mean, so that's what we are committed to. And we are committed to getting better at this, and we are committed to having more police agencies participate with us so that ultimately, right, we can make some very high-level recommendations of how to reduce the negative outcome that we see in policing. Please.
I thought your example of Salt Lake City, where if there was a high-speed chase, for instance, that the primary chaser, if that's the right term, wouldn't be the person who would make the arrest. Seems really reasonable and sound, and certainly related to that moment in time, right, where force is often used. And you went on to say that you don't know that it's quite right that racial profiling happens in policing. So I wonder if you think that it's quite wrong. Oh,
it's quite wrong. If I said that and gave you any impression that I'm not condemning racial profiling, I was mistaken or misspoken. No, be very clear.
And then, you know, that moment in time, I think, is just such an interesting, fascinating piece of what it is to police in America today. And wonder if you could speak briefly, I know this is probably not the focus of your talk so much related to data, but related to Graham and the responsible police officer and kind of that moment in time valuation that really comes into play when we're holding officers accountable.
Okay, so you're talking about a reasonable, not a responsible police officer. Okay, no, I just want to make sure that we're speaking the same language.
Yeah, it is, and it was probably my autocorrect.
Oh, got it. So this is the challenge facing us today, right? You have this, and it's a court case, right, that has guided for policing, I don't know when, I mean, you may have a citation there if you just pulled it up, for a number of years, right, that talks about the reasonable, right, use of force. Well, reason, boy, that just leaves a lot of gray area to look at. And it also, right, while it takes into account, so if as the police officer in a situation, I cause the situation by my actions that then lead me to use the force, then that's not appropriate, right? So if I am somehow inducing whatever it is, the action, so I can utilize force, then that's not reasonable and that's not necessary. And so when you start wandering down this road into what it is, I mean, this is legal, that Chris Burbank is certainly not a legal expert by any means. But what we want to change and address, and so this can be addressed, right? So it's what's a reasonable police officer, not a reasonable citizen. Right? It takes all of us as the public out of the game. So while we may condemn it, it may be perfectly reasonable for an officer given their training and thing. The other thing that it does do, which is interesting because it cuts both ways, right? It also holds police officers, because of their training experience, to a higher standard than the public in the same use of force statute. Now I know, because I heard the sound over here, and again, I can't see, right? It's like, yeah, what is the standard, everything else? I hear you. I hear you. If I did not hear you, I wouldn't be here. Right? I would not be here today. And I notice the chief sitting up here, right? She's in a horrible situation. I mean, this is one of the most difficult situations that she can be involved in right at this moment. And if she did not hear you, I guarantee she wouldn't be here. Now, whether you agree or disagree with her, right? She would not be here. She hears you. But then how then are we going to change? Are we going to interpret this standard or change, right? So you have the ability of challenging it in court and coming to a different conclusion under the Supreme Court, or, you know, and change the outcome. Or you can start to look and evaluate what are those situations in which an officer uses force, and can we reduce the situation ever getting to that point? And this goes back to, is it... And again, if I had that answer, I mean, I can point to and say, well, these are some of the things that contribute. But if I could tell you all tomorrow, if you did away with all search and seizure, you would no more, you wouldn't shoot anyone else in your community. Well, run down and sign up for that. But I can't. I wish I could. But maybe it will reduce. Right? All the things that we look at, that we evaluate, that we consider when doing this. Right? Civilian Review Board. I'm an advocate for Civilian Review Board. I honestly can't tell you if you have a Civilian Review Board. I'm not talking about someone who's going to make the decision of the police chief. I'm talking to someone that's going to have access to the same information that the police chief or the decision maker has in this situation, that has the capability to access the information and make recommendation that is public. That's not a bad thing. And that starts to get community involvement into what the reasonable standard is. One of the things that you all need to know, because I think most of, well, no, there's still some students here. I chastised the students today, right? And I chastised them for two things. One is the anger issue. Two is vote. Right? And I always like to point to Utah. There's a total of 7 Democrats in our Senate. And again, I'm not looking to advocate for Democrats over Republicans. I just like balance. But when you consider that the lowest in the state of Utah voter turnout is to students attending higher education in the state of Utah, that's horrible. Second to that, women. 60-something% of the Utah population doesn't turn out to vote because of their, we won't say because of their gender, but, and then our Latino population. If those people showed up to vote, to participate, their voice would be heard. Now again, this is Chris Burbank. I like the process. I think that to make change, and I will point to, and again, I'm not a history major, there's certainly people there, I think the most successful protest change that has taken place in our nation has been the civil rights movement. There was anger. There was atrocity that took place, unfortunately. There was unrest. There was civil disobedience. But the one thing that people often forget is there was also negotiation that occurred. And I don't know what the inside looked like when Dr. King sat down with the president. But I can tell you, he probably wasn't overly happy to be talking to Johnson and trying to convince him of what took place. But would we be in the situation without the middle ground that it came to there? Now, did that solve the problem? No, I'm not, but without a doubt. And would have it happened without that legislation coming to fruition? And that's a little bit, I mean, you look at movements recent and everything else, there's great anger, there's great emotion. And yes, it gets on TV, and quite frankly, it captures people's attention. But then where is the solution, the negotiation to take place in order to meet the expectation of the group that is upset and outraged? And that's where we've stumbled time and time again. Please.
So then what specific recommendations do you have for addressing kind of the systemic white supremacy in the nation that causes the kind of overall disparity that we see and that predominantly we are faced with when we have people that should be taking responsibility from both sides, as you say, but this promotes the fallacy that we're all able to have peace in the color of our skin, and I don't think that that's the reality today.
Oh, no, I don't disagree with you.
So then what practical approach are you recommending, if any?
You realize when I stood up and said, boy, that's a hard expectation that the chancellor laid out, and what you just threw down, I mean, much smarter individuals and more well-versed than I. So I would say, right, as you are looking at the issue before us now, right, and that is the expectation and the dissatisfaction with the policing of America. Now, it is a much bigger issue because there's racism in healthcare, there's racism in education. I mean, we can go down the list again. But as we look at that, right, that you have scientific, right, information that you can look and evaluate, that we can say, this is actually what's taking place. One of the greatest insults to my profession and those people participating in it is when the Washington Post did a study on how many people we shot in America. And the response from the policing profession was, we don't know if that's right. I'll tell you right now, I could tell you exactly who those people were and what their names were. Most police chiefs can. Why do we not have this data captured? We are taking the very life of our citizens and we don't have the ability to account for it? Where is the expectation there? And why is anybody in an elected position that is not going to take that issue on? And shame on every single one of us, including myself, that we are not getting other people elected that are going to do that very thing for us. Right? We authorize our people. In fact, the very well-being of our nation, right, part of it is that conflict that potentially could occur. Now, we want to limit that conflict. I'm not just acquiescing and saying it's a good thing, but we want to reduce that potential conflict that may occur between a citizen and a citizen. Because the police are no different than the person there. I mean, we are all citizens of this country trying to be the best we can. Now, when we have that, how are we going to change that interaction if we can't even tell you when, how often we use that tool? And then you start wandering down the road, right? The FBI can tell you, I bet you within 25 vehicles, how many vehicles were stolen in the nation? How many burglaries occurred? But we can't tell anyone how much force was used in this country? We can't tell you how many times that we took away the civil rights of an individual and searched them? Or infringed, we won't say take away, infringed upon that right. Those are the types of things that, yes, we should be capturing. We should have a standard for this. So when you start wandering down, how can we do this? These are the types of things that you should expect from your elected officials, that conversations should be having with your local police department. How can we access? How can we make this information public? Now, the challenge that you always have, right, and it's not an easy challenge because, boy, if I say, and I'm an advocate, right, you can look up Chris Burbank, I gave away everything. But when you supply everyone with the data, everything that exists. That also includes sexual assault, that looks at minor, I mean, there's everything. And the challenge that we have is, as the police chief, I should not be the social conscience for society. If I'm playing that role, boy, I'm taking on huge responsibility. Society should do that. And I'll give you the example that I have. So I had an unfortunate circumstance that occurred just shortly after Ferguson. I had a young police officer shoot an unarmed 18-year-old Hispanic man in the parking lot of a 7-Eleven. Right? Video showed the entire thing. I chose to release the entire video. And had lots of people say, no, you can't do that. You're showing somebody die. Yes, I am. I'm showing a young man lose his life. But I'm not showing it. And I gave the lecture as I handed out the video to the media. It is your responsibility to be the social conscience of society and determine if, in fact, you're going to show that. And the majority of outlets stopped just short and were sensitive to that and the family members and everything. Now, yeah, there were some that did and ran the whole thing, but the majority did not. But once I say as the police chief, no public, this is too sensitive for you, I'm not taking that responsibility on. And that's a huge responsibility. I mean, it's tremendous. And so, advocate. I mean, I know you have very restrictive laws here on the release of videos and those types of things. Right? Those are avenues. Those are first reports of information. Some of those should be available. I agree, not everything. But you need to start working, right? Those are the questions that you need to ask politicians, right? And policing, one of the things that I think is important for everyone to know, while I like the idea of expectation from the federal government that we report what takes place, the idea of federal law enforcement being best for your community, because it's vastly different. I mean, I've only been here a day and a half, never been to your city before, other parts of the state I have. Right? You are vastly different than Salt Lake City. There's some similarities. What your expectations, what you all do, what you encounter is different than Salt Lake City. You shouldn't have the same sort of social contract that exists. That needs to be decided locally, and that's where it's best decided. But in doing so locally, we make sure that accounting for the system is equal across the board. So I talked a lot. I don't know if I answered all your questions, and quite frankly, I don't know that I can. I really wish I could. But one of the things that I think is so important, you know I can't read that. Wrap up time, okay. I am not subtle. I don't need to be, right? But one of the things, I lost my train of thought completely. But one of the things that I think is so important, right, is that we all stand up and participate in the local system. Right? Lots of people, when I ask the question, I do every time I speak in a university setting, how many of you voted? And what election was that? Did you vote in the local election? Right? I like the man who's shaking his head. Absolutely I did. I'm at every single one. Amen. And I take my kids, ever since they were little kids, right? We went to vote. And it was voting day. And in fact, I hate vote by mail. And I don't like to do it because I like the example of the police chief, or the former police chief, and at the time I would always go vote in uniform. Voting. Participate. We have within us the capability of accomplishing this. Right? Look to the middle, look to reason, and look to those things that will help solve the problem. Thank you so much for having me. I do appreciate it.